Thank you so much, Speaker. I want to first off start by thanking the Attorney General and his parliamentary assistant, the member from Durham. It was an honour to be able to write my speech and write down all the important notes to clarify a lot of things that have been said in this House today. So I appreciate the opportunity to stand in the House today, Speaker, in support of a bill that, if passed, would make it easier, faster and more affordable for people in Ontario to access the justice system. Bill 161, the Smarter and Stronger Justice Act, supports the hard-working people of this province by modernizing and amending outdated laws. It strengthens protections for victims of crime, it protects the most vulnerable members of our society, and it makes it easier to seize the assets used in illegal activities by criminals. I'm not a lawyer, and that's a good thing because I bring another perspective to the debate today. The proposal contained in Bill 161 reflect countless hours of conversations with frontline staff and legal partners, including Legal Aid Ontario, the Law Society of Ontario, and the Association of Community Legal Clinics of Ontario. The Attorney General also consulted with Ontario's everyday heroes in law enforcement, the Federation of Ontario Law Association, the Ontario Bar Association, the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association, the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers, the South Asian Bar Association, the Ontario Paralegal Association, along with various consumer groups and many, many others. The government heard loud and clear that people are struggling every day to navigate a system that even lawyers find challenging at times, Speaker. That's why modernizing Ontario's justice system will help make our streets safer, put victims and their families at the centre of the justice system, and hold criminals accountable for their actions. The Smarter and Stronger Justice Act proposes amendments to more than 20 acts with the goal of making it easier, faster, and more affordable to access justice in Ontario. These improvements reflect our government's determination to work with justice partners to build safer communities. Throughout the global pandemic, my constituency office has continued to help Burlington residents with document verification for pensions, gifting a used vehicle to a family member, to access government services, and to even prepare claims for small claims court. In the middle of COVID-19, when we were all telling people to stay home, when most businesses were closed, Speaker, Ontario's outdated system for verifying documents through notaries and commissioners forced people to leave the safety of their homes to complete a simple administrative task that could have been done online. Many of the people who came into my Burlington office told me that if they can bank online, if they can sign a document online to rent a property, if they can access their COVID-19 test results online, then why can't the justice system work the same way? We had that over and over again. I'm sure everybody else had that as well. When the Attorney General introduced this bill, he said, and I quote, "Banking transactions don't always require a trip to the bank, and even legal transactions shouldn't require a trip to a physical office," unquote. I totally agree, Speaker. Online document verifications have been happening all over the world for years. It's time for Ontario to catch up. These proposed changes were initially introduced through Bill 161, but were passed by our government in Bill 190 in June. I mention these changes nonetheless because we have demonstrated that we are agile and we are ready to respond to the realities of the public health emergency in the justice sector and beyond. It also demonstrates, Speaker, that our government has been thinking how to modernize our outdated, complex justice system before the public health emergency even began. Now people who are comfortable accessing these types of services virtually will be able to do wherever they live. Speaker, our focus is on victims, their families, their children, their parents, their spouses, and their loved ones. When criminals are allowed to profit from illegal activity, it affects our whole society. Ontario was once the Canadian leader in deterring crime through property forfeit. Unfortunately, over the years, we've fallen behind other provinces who've developed and adapted new best practices. The Smarter and Stronger Justice Act would create a new tool to get ahead of the criminals who prey on our community for profit. We all agree that crime should not pay. We know that all levels of government must continue to stand up for victims and for vulnerable members of our communities. We know that we must support the prosecutors in their work on the front lines. Premier Ford once said, and I quote, "When we cut off the resources that crooks use to fund illegal operations, we take that money and use it for fighting crime and keeping us safe," unquote. And Speaker, Ontarians agree with the Premier. People I've spoken to within Burlington tell me that they want the government to take strong action against criminals who use money for illegal activities that fund even more crime. They want us to take action to support victims of crime. That's why the Attorney General is working with justice partners, including the heroes in law enforcement, to stand up for victims and to hold offenders accountable. By modernizing and simplifying laws around civil assets, forfeit, we strengthen our justice system and further support victims of crime. In support of this view, York Region Police Deputy Chief Brian McGrath said, and I quote, "The value of illicit assets seized by police each year extends into the millions of dollars. A portion of these illicit assets go uncontested, meaning no one is claiming ownership due to the criminal nature in which these assets were attained," unquote. Speaker, the government uses seized funds to compensate victims of crime and to provide grants to projects with a mandate of combating crime like human trafficking, which is a crisis our government is urgently working with survivors and justice partners to solve. The proposed changes to the civil forfeiture system has received broad support from key members of our law enforcement community. Chief Paul Pedersen, President of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, said, and I quote, "We support the proposed legislation changes to the Civil Remedies Act because it will simplify the process around personal property while also relieving the burdens of our police personnel and the court system," unquote. Our government wants to make it as hard as possible for criminals to hold on to the proceeds of their crime. We also want to maintain protections that ensure innocent people, including those who rent or lease their property, are not adversely or unfairly affected. Updating Ontario's 2001 laws on property would expand Ontario's ability to take away the profits of illegal activity from criminals. We're talking about the guns, the cash, the automobiles, and other property that fuels future criminal activity, Speaker. Taking strong action today will also enable Ontario to catch up with the best practices used in other provinces and territories across the country. For those outside the legal community, if you've ever watched Aaron Brockovich, you know that a class action is a civil lawsuit brought by one representative on behalf of larger groups of people to resolve common or similar issues in a single proceeding. The result of that proceeding binds everyone in the group unless they opt out. In Ontario, unlike the United States, class action suits are guided by three principles: access to justice, judicial economy, and behavioral modification. Speaker, over the years, class actions have changed significantly in terms of both their complexity and the volume. Yet despite these changes, the Class Proceedings Act hasn't been significantly updated in over 25 years. As a result, the Act does not always reflect the current reality, and obviously it wouldn't if it's been 25 years. Today, class action suits can take years to work their way through the court system. The cost of these lengthy lawsuits impacts employers, employees, consumers, and even the litigants themselves. The changes being proposed will allow cases to be dismissed for delay where no meaningful steps have been taken to settle the suit, Speaker. We all recognize that public consultations are about more than just giving advice. It's an opportunity for organizations, professionals, and members of the general public to provide meaningful input and to propose legislative changes that will impact them. I was pleased to hear from the Attorney General that last fall and pre-COVID, the Ministry consulted on these important reforms to the Class Proceeding Act with 1. Over 20 plaintiff and defence class action law firms, 2. Legal organizations like the Ontario Bar Association who hosted a roundtable on the subject, 3. Advocacy groups like the Consumers Council of Canada and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. 4. Industry groups in automotive, banking, insurance, and pharmacy, as well as litigation funders and many others. Another key stakeholder the Attorney General met with was the Law Commissioner of Ontario, Speaker, which issued an extensive report last summer on class actions in Ontario. The Law Commissioner's Class Actions Project and final report resulted in more than 40 recommendations on how to reform class actions legislation and related policies. As a result of these meaningful consultations, the Ministry has either fully or substantially adopted many of the Law Commission's recommendations. I thought that was very important to put that in. If you missed my speech this morning on the extension of the provincial state of emergency, I'll share with you one of my favourite quotes from Herbert Swalp, a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner journalist who became famous as a war correspondent and as the editor of the New York World. He said, and I quote, "I cannot give you the formula for success, but I can give you the formula for failure, which is try to please everybody," unquote. Over the years, Ontario has countless Liberal and progressive Conservative governments. In the last 153 years, we even had one Ontario NDP government. Regardless of the party in office, we all do our best to put forward legislation that is fair and that is balanced. Back in the 1990s, did every public sector worker think that the NDP government's social contract was fair or balanced? Was everyone in the public sector satisfied with Premier McGuinty's legislated 0% wage freeze back in 2020? Of course not. But I'm sure both the NDP and the independent Liberal members opposite will agree that their governments consulted with stakeholders. If passed, Bill 161 will also establish the tools courts need to decide whether Ontario is the best jurisdiction to resolve the claim. If there are competing cases in other provinces, this is important because it can help avoid needless expenditures of resources for both plaintiffs and defendants if Ontario is not the most appropriate forum, Speaker. As the number of class action cases has increased, which we all know it has, we've also seen an increase in the number of third-party funders. You might not realize it, but class action suits are sometimes being bankrolled by a third party, someone who is not a party in the case. Sometimes a person or organization based in the United States or elsewhere, Speaker. There are currently no rules about when and how third-party funders are permitted. Bill 161 provides transparency and establishes safeguards to ensure third-party funding agreements have proper oversight to ensure members' interests are protected, Speaker. Ontario's current justice system is outdated. It's slow, and it doesn't always put people at the centre of this needs to change, and every one of us in this House have heard that. Speaking of change, back in 1998, the Rachel haircut was all the rage. People visited their local video store to get the latest movie on VHS. The first BlackBerry hadn't hit the market yet, and the 2-liter bottle of Coke cost just 89 cents, and that wasn't even on sale. Although a lot has changed since 1990, the Legal Aid Service Act has stayed mostly the same. And Speaker, nowhere is innovation and modernization more important than our legal aid system. After extensive and broad consultation with Legal Aid Ontario and various community legal clinics across the province, the Attorney General has proposed amendments that will provide Legal Aid Ontario with the tools it needs to help clients resolve their legal issues faster with fewer roadblocks. That's why the Attorney General introduced Bill 161. Charles Harnick from Ontario Attorney General and Chair of the Board of Legal Aid Ontario, and David Field, CEO of Legal Aid Ontario, stood with the minister in support of the government's proposed changes. During consultation with Legal Aid Ontario and other justice partners, the Attorney General heard that current legislation creates barriers to legal aid access for those who need it most, Speaker. We also heard that the legal aid system is difficult for clients to navigate and that clients encounter roadblocks based on the types of services they need, and everyone has heard that, where they live and who the service providers are in the neighbourhood or regions. That's why David Field, the CEO of Legal Aid Ontario, expressed support for the bill, saying, and I quote, "The new Legal Aid Services Act is an important step towards improving access to justice in Ontario. It offers opportunities for innovation and allows us to address gaps in the justice system. This legislation, if passed, would allow Legal Aid Ontario and its valued service providers, including staff, clinics, and the private bar, to better serve clients," unquote. Now, so there you go with that. While the changes of our government is proposing will give Legal Aid Ontario the responsibility for designing new rules around how it provides its services, this bill also has several checks and safeguards to ensure that Legal Aid Ontario carries out this role in a manner that is transparent and accountable, featuring a robust public consultation framework. Speaker, I move that the question now be put.